We're getting into a conversation around supporting the youth agenda, and our guest this hour is in the hot seat. She's here. The very tall Senator for nominated Senator Karen Nyamu is our guest this hour, and she's in the hot seat. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, Mdu, and good morning, Dennis.
How are you?
I'm very good.
Karibu sana.
Mdu, you must tell the audience that we actually went to university together. We were in the same master's class.
Mm-hmm.
Did you think that you'd end up in media? Oh, not.
Did you think that you would end up as a senator?
Not really. Not at that point.
At that point, no. Yeah. Actually, so one of the classes that we were in was a master's class in international relations, and that was interesting. So we must at least say that. So there were many nights of long books.
I know, a lot of studying and rigorous international relations program.
Indeed. And here we are having a conversation across the table about supporting a youth agenda when it comes to the political sphere. So we want to say thank you and welcome for coming. There are many a conversation to be had around, what can be done and what should be done, and what side of, this entire conversation and discourse you sit. But before we do that, let's welcome you to the Situation Room with today's proverb. Dennis will tell you which country we are in. And I also know that your first degree is a law degree.
Yes.
So you often interpret things. So in this case, that you will interpret the proverb for us and tell us what you think about it.
Okay.
All right.
So today we are in a country from the northern part of Africa, the Maghreb region. To be specific, Tunisia, whose capital is Tunis. Now we're talking about a country that has around 12 million people. And great thing about it is the fact that they got independence from the French, so they speak Arabic and French as well. But things that stand out with it and is the fact that there are some scenes of Star Wars that was shot in that country. They have beautiful souks, which are there are markets where people go to just have fun, enjoy what Tunisia is made about. And our proverb today, a lazy one who sleeps well pays the prize. A lazy one who sleeps well pays the prize. How would you interpret that?
I think it just basically means that a comfort zone is poisonous, that you have to pay for a price for comfort. And that when you're lazy, it means you're not productive and you miss out on what you'd be doing if you are busy.
Well put.
Need to be doing something. That's for sure.
You should do something.
Oh, great. The interpretation works. So even as we get into this, today we're looking at supporting the youth agenda. There have been conversations let's look intensely at the last 1 year, whereby there has been a desperate call to have a younger representation, probably in the majority, in how things are done when it comes to governance and leadership. First of all, your perspective as indeed, yes, a young leader in the country today, nominated or not, still a leader. And the question is, what is your thought, or where is your thinking around what the youth agenda must comprise of, and then what it must go towards when it leads towards governance?
Thank you, Ndu. A good question indeed, because thinking about it, youth are comprised of 75% of the country, and that's when we say youth in the country, it's interpreted as persons under 35 years. They are the majority in the country, but when you look at representation, it does not reflect. We know there are steps in affirmative action that have led to affirmative action seats for women, but when you look at youth have one seat in the National Assembly, a nominated seat. Women have more. In the Senate, women have 16 seats. Youth have 1 seat. And these are affirmative action seats. And that goes to show how not seriously we take the young people of this country. The writers of the Constitution saw it best to have only 1 seat in the National Assembly to represent an entire 75% of this population. If you look at the affirmative action also in the executive sphere, the ministries and department or government departments, you don't really see that strong youth representation. Is it that we do not have able or qualified youth? Far from it, because we know currently the Gen Z happen to be one of the most woke generations of our time. They are the most educated, they are asking questions, and at this point I would want to urge them to get into this leadership space. Of course, it looks like there are so many barriers to get into this space. There is the financial bit of it. Of course, it's not easy, it's very tough, but I encourage them to get there, because social media will not cut it. It's not enough. Criticizing the government and those nasty comments that you make against the government are not a solution and are not having any impact in governance. We want the youth to go out there and go for elective positions.
Where should they go? How should they do it?
The first step is to get into a political party, because those are the systems we have in the country. That's the way of getting into leadership in this country. They are the vehicles how you get into leadership. Identify a political party that has the ideology that you identify with or you support, and get in there, participate, and have a voice in the country, because it is very important that youth affairs are managed by young people.
So we live in a country where you mentioned the Gen Z being a crop of the young people in the country who are most woke. And yet again, we also know the Gen Zs have spoken. A lot has been said about them. The calls for the finance bill 2024, the conversations around that. We all know how that went down. But there is a feeling that the political class there is not listening to the young people of the country and the agenda that they present. So what will it take for the political class to finally listen to the youth of this country and the agenda and the issues that they raise?
Well, it is true that to some point, the political class was not listening to the youth. But the extent to which this ignoring the youth took this country last year in June has forced us to listen and to factor them, to factor the youth in governance. If you look at the Finance Bill 2025 proposal that was passed in Cabinet, for example, and that is being prepared to go to the National Assembly, you see a big difference in dispatch from what we had last year. The government has proposed no new taxes this year, and the government is focusing on reining in on the existing taxes and maximizing on them. There's what you call the tax return cartels. You file for taxes, then you claim returns. I mean, it's a huge cartel that is robbing government money. There's a crackdown to ensure that the tax evasions and tax avoidance is reducing and being eliminated altogether. And so that is an indication that we actually listen. As much as we have a very ambitious president who wants to accelerate everything, who wants to do everything very quickly, he has had to slow down and sort of go in the same tempo with the citizenry, because Kenyans have said it loud and clear. They do not want to pay more taxes. And we, as much as we are ambitious, we want to implement this, we want to implement the other. We have to go at a pace that the Kenyan can take.
One of the big things that young people ask for is jobs. Very clear that while we know that the job of government is not to provide jobs, but that to create a conducive environment where jobs can be created. Now, this conducive environment is what we see, unfortunately, is not being created. What we do see is that there is a small cabal of people who get these jobs to the tune of being paid almost 60 billion shillings in a year, whereby there are, like you said, 75% of the population, and a majority of that population is begging, just give us a job. Just the other day, we have issues where, and it's not just young people, younger and older people trying to leave the country to get jobs outside, and even then paying money and not being able to go. So we don't see that appetite. we don't see that desire. We don't see that establishment of even getting young people work to do, or creating a conducive environment where that can happen, or where business can thrive. How do we point ourselves in the direction to actually see this happening when we see 20 advisors, for example, earning 60 billion shillings in a year, whereby capitation for young people has not been sent to schools? How do we make that connect, Senator?
No, I think the focus, when you ask that question, your focus is not in the right place.
Where should it be?
How we come about creating employment. First of all, right from the education system. We have an education system that does not prepare our young people for the job market. We do a lot of theory, and there's a mismatch with the skill and the demands at the workplace. As much as every year, between 500,000 and 800,000 youth are getting into the job market from the different institutions, tertiary institutions, the universities, the colleges, the TVETs. They're all looking for employment. It's not possible to employ our young people. And I want to fault our education system because it prepares our students to be job seekers once they complete school, as opposed to preparing them to create employment. We don't have an entrepreneurial culture. We have a culture where we just want to be employed. And that creates even an underemployment, because you see you have a degree and you're driving a matatu because you believe in employment. Well, you could put that degree to good use, creating employment for your fellow youth.
So what needs to happen in order for that employment to take place?
What needs
that business acumen, that entrepreneurship?
We need to radically change our education system.
And whose responsibility is that?
The Ministry of Education, of course.
Under the who? The government? Led by?
Oh, please.
Who runs the ministry? Oh, okay. I need you to be able to say it so
obvious,
we know where we are.
I don't think we are here to put blames on anyone. Yeah, it's true. We need to have radical changes. China has done it. Our youth is a resource and a major resource. And Kenya is actually one of the countries whose labor force is actually on demand outside other countries. We have put the country in the map in that way because for some reason our skill and maybe discipline and acumen is actually on demand globally.
You see, we're talking at a time when, because you speak of a youth whose skill is in demand out there. But then, and at the same breath, you say our education system has not created a youth who have a skill, a youth who are not ready for employment, a youth who do not create employment. But that aside, during the election period, there is a promise that the leadership that went with, that we will create 1 million jobs for the young people once we get government, right? And there has been the talk of, okay, fine, affordable housing and jobs created and whatnot. But then, if it is impossible to create all this employment, there is need for the government to create conducive environment for jobs to be created. And one of the ways to do that is to cut the government bureaucracies, reduce, say, energy prices. But on the other hand, you find that bureaucracies continue to increase. It comes to stuff like power continues to increase. Then how is the government failing to address these issues that need to be addressed to hence create employment for the young people of this country?
One of the approaches that the government has taken is to equip the youth with skills that match the workforce demands. The TVET, our institutions, the technical, vocational training, the government is really voting for that. And we have youth who are being encouraged to take this technical training as opposed to the traditional education, which is a very good thing because it also creates social balance for even the youth who could not be able to pursue the traditional education as we know it, the BComs, the law the medicine. So it creates kind of a social balance. Another thing that the government is doing to create environment is a youth enterprise fund. I don't know if you know about it. It is very instrumental in facilitating young Kenyans to have access in opportunities that are found outside this country. Because, there are barriers. There are financial barriers. There's a youth in the village who would never dream of having to work in Qatar or Dubai, for example. But here is a fund where it advances 300,000 shillings per youth, interest-free, to cover the essential expenses, the
of
air
going
ticket
outside the country.
Yes.
Okay.
The air ticket, the medical expenses, and the visa processing. This fund is also advanced to youth in groups to start business. Of course, there's a high default rate of this fund, and that goes to emphasize my point that we lack entrepreneurial culture. So the government should embark on a mentorship program where the youth who have already completed school, because they're not going to go back to school to learn entrepreneurship, right from when you get this fund, before you can access it, have training, go through how to run a successful business. I mean, because the youth of this country are obsessed, so to speak, with quick riches. And that's why you see they have gotten into gambling, which is another silent epidemic that's happening to our youth.
Yeah. Some would say that what you see is an output or a symptom of a deeper problem. That when we speak about things like alcoholism and when you talk about drug abuse and things like that, those are symptoms of another problem. That it goes back to that I don't have anything to do, and that is why I go in this direction. But when you keep saying, Senator, that, the government I actually agree with you. I actually do agree with you that the government must do 1, 2, 3. But it would appear as though a lot of time and effort and money and resources are spent on paying attention to the things that essentially will not move this country forward. When we talk about saying things like, again, I'm going to go back to the advisors. Yesterday, we had a conversation with the CS, Ministry of Labour and Social Protection. And we're talking about people who've paid money and are not able to go where they said that they were going to go. We're talking about a huge bulge that is waiting and saying, what can I do? The jobs, and I think it's okay that if you can create an environment where people are able to go outside and get the jobs which they cannot get here, but if we're also saying that we then need to make sure that certain things are happening in country but are not happening, we join the bandwagon of saying the government must. So why is government not doing that? We spend a lot of time politicking. Why is it not doing?
The government depends on an economy. When the economy is thriving, the government will rely on a vibrant economy to create employment. And that's why you're right when you say the government's role is to create that enabling environment. But you see, some of the times creating this enabling environment comes with regulations that Kenyans, something is happening to Kenyans. They resist change. Kenyans resist change. And we have seen that in the recent past. I don't think we've had a president who's come in and made changes, NHIF to SHA.
That don't work.
That don't work.
SHA is working. Let's not. Okay, it had teething problems. But at the moment, you will agree with me that the story is different. A lot has changed, a lot of improvement, and a lot of silence in that corner. The hue and cry and the decibels about SHA have gone down, and you as media must appreciate that. When it comes, going back to the issue of unemployment.
No, you were saying that there's a president now who is making changes like we've never seen before that are actually going to affect people. Beyond SHA, what else are we talking about?
There's the funding model, the university funding model that also brought resistance. There's
Senator, that's an absolute flop. I mean, we can't even start to say that that has worked.
You do not appreciate the rationale behind that the model, because it's not a model that Kenyans was tailored by Kenyans. It is a model that is working elsewhere. And there are other countries also who have done benchmarking in Kenya and actually think it's an excellent model. But as you say, it's a flop. That means Kenyans resist change.
Who's in charge of implementing the university funding model?
The ministry.
The ministry. And with regard to that funding model, what are some of the issues that are being raised by the young people with regard to that funding model?
You see, with that funding model, it first finds out your background. There's a questionnaire so that they can understand what kind of homestead are you coming from, what kind of parents, what is their income. And so there is maybe misplacement, maybe a poor child has been placed in a category
the banding, yes.
that is not theirs. So right from that point, we need to streamline how we cluster our university students. But that does not mean that we throw away the baby with the bathwater. We need, just like SHA, which was very problematic in the beginning, but right now the noise has gone down. And in the fullness of time, we will all be SHA ambassadors in our own right, including yourselves.
Okay. This is an aspirational call, proclamation here. I want to go to what happens when young people then actually do get into leadership positions, as opposed to then being, essentially, cheerers on or cheerleaders for the executive. What happens that when you actually do see things that are not going as they should, pointing them out as opposed to continuing to cheer on?
A political party is like a family.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes, it is, because we believe in the same ideology. And if I'm wrong, for example, if a certain minister is not doing, or a CS, is doing what I think he could do better, or is on the wrong direction, I don't have to criticize him in the public. And so the same case applies to the president.
Is there a problem in criticizing them in public, though?
It is just like criticizing your father in public. I mean, you can correct him. It doesn't mean that your point will not be made. You as the
members of the political party, not the public.
The public.
The public are not in this family. Yes. This is the political parties.
Yes, I'm talking about us, the young leaders, because you expect us to go out there and make statements against the government and our boss. And that's not the right channel. That's not how to do it. We do it a lot, but on the right forum.
Does it yield or bear any fruit?
A lot.
What, like so?
No, I cannot say that without disclosing.
Well, look, here we are in a situation, Senator, where we are saying, for example, we can see that this funding model is not working, that there was a presidential working party on education reforms that went around the country, and that there were certain things that they did. They compiled a report, and yet we have 800,000, by your own admission, students who go into university every year. Who are ready for university, but we only have about a quarter of that going into university, and that they still cannot fund their university education because 1, 2, 3 we see is wrong. The whole issue becomes politicized, and what you're telling me is that you can actually go and say, guys, this is not working. Can we see a turnaround of these things? Do we actually see that somebody says, yes, I see what you've said, and we're actually going to make this change? Do we see that?
I'm sure you have seen a progressive changes here and there, but the intention and the model, the original model, will not change because it is well intended and it has outcomes that are anticipated by it. It is well thought out already, and it should work.
Even when the implementation of it is failing, how then do we fix that?
The implementation is getting fixed as we get feedback. As we go, you get this feedback and it's fixed. But I don't think we have exhausted the issue of unemployment in this country.
Looking at exhausting this issue of youth unemployment in the country and saying that what can actually be done. I mean, let's be real. What can actually be done where you have a bulging population of 75% of the country? That's, it's well above 30 million people who are depending on an environment to provide jobs, but there seem to be certain things that take the priority, or that there seems to be certain things that are not done. I'm curious as to your thoughts to that, because that's one of the things that people say, well, if you can't go in there and change some of those things, then, what do we do?
The government is very keen on making the manufacturing industry a very, very vibrant in this country. And we have projections where the textiles and apparel are projected to actually employ 200,000 youth if implemented. And the incentives are there. We have agreements already and deals that the president made in China in his recent visit. We have the leather industry that have the potential of employing 50,000 youth. We have the SMEs, and that includes even in the agricultural sector, that has potential of employing over 100,000 youth. At the same time, we want our youth to not to think outside of white collar jobs. It's not easy. If you in this country, if a young person is begging you for a job, and you even make a suggestion that they can actually start a business and employ fellow youth, then you will hear excuse after excuse. There's excuse of capital. There's excuse of all manner of excuses.
But are those excuses or are those realities? When you talk about capital, for example.
Do you know, and if you've had stories from successful business people, how they started, they didn't start with. In fact, one of the surest way to fail in entrepreneurship is starting with everything right. Because you need to learn lessons as you go. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and there's nothing that can prepare you for entrepreneurship in a classroom. You have to go out there and start small and build the resilience as you go. And so I still insist on instilling that culture on our young people. Our youth even make memes about motivation. They laugh at people who say they started the business small, and they say, okay, so I'm a chicken farmer, I started with a feather. Or because they think it's hilarious and they think it's a joke. But this issue is not to be taken lightly, because it's having counter effects on our young people. And the coping mechanisms of unemployment that the youth are taking up, including the abuse of substance, gambling, as I referred to earlier, in our slums here in Nairobi, our informal settlements, you will not walk 10 steps before you find a gaming store. Aviator has become a crazy addiction for our youth. And you see, they go into it thinking that they're going to make a quick buck. And what you go into as casual and leisurely ends up being an addiction that your life actually is falling apart. Families are falling apart because of gambling. The addiction is so bad that we have gambling related suicides in the country. And I read somewhere that out of 20 gambling suicides that happen in East Africa, Kenyans are actually 12, which is very serious. I don't know how we got here. And the statistics show that in Africa, Kenya comes third after South Africa and Nigeria in gambling. Is it because our laws are so lax? And sometimes you cannot blame us, because, for example, last year, let me talk about the projection this year. Gambling is said to be projected to have revenues of $1.2 billion to the country. I mean, such kind of revenues are irresistible. There are better options than going to borrow that we
exactly, and I think that's the point. That's the environment that we talk about that has not been created, and so this is an almost easy escape for lots of people who don't have an option.
And if you look at the regulations that we put forward, we had the gambling regulation bill in the Senate last year, and we are so keen in regulating the revenues, making sure that everyone is licensed so that they can pay. Everyone is operating like in a certain way so that we reap maximum. But what about our people? What about our youth? Is it worth it losing even a single life from gambling? Is that money worth it? Is the $1.2 billion projections for 2025, are they worth losing one Kenyan youth? Those are questions, of course, that we need to debate.
Ask. Okay. Yeah, so we talk about gambling and unemployment leading Kenyan youth into gambling. But then again, let us go back to matters to do with creating a proper environment for entrepreneurs to thrive in this country. And with this comes in place how easy it is for young people out there to register their businesses. And one would argue it is not as walk in, walk out and your business is registered. Then we go forward to issues to do with access to fund. You talk about youth empowerment fund. Yeah, but then again, how do you go through the system and bureaucracies for you to be able to get that? But then again, there is also just going to financial institutions to get loans. But that is difficult as it stands because the government itself is borrowing from local lenders, which is making it even harder for the young people who want to be entrepreneurs themselves. And one would hope that the leadership, the senators, yourself, would be able to walk in during the finance bill that we're talking about to make it difficult for the government to borrow locally. But we're not seeing that happen. Why is that the case?
I know that the Companies Act 2005 made it very easy for someone. You can actually register your own company right from your phone. Previously, we had to use a lawyer to file all these documents. These days, from your e-citizen platform, you can fill a number of forms and wait a number of days, make your payments, and have a company registered. We have also laws that ensure that 30% of government business, and that is standards, is going to the young people, women, and the people living with disabilities. And I remember last year I tasked the ministry, the National Treasury, to give us statistics to show us how many youth are benefiting from this law.
How they?
Because we know that there are unscrupulous dealers who register companies using young people, using women, and end up getting this quota that belongs to our young people.
Has the ministry given you the statistic, and what does it say?
You know, what the ministry gave us feedback, but what the ministry gave us is what is already existent on the documentation, because they will not go to establish the physical person, or do they run this business or not. So it's also very difficult to get the culprits, but we keep pushing that this law is implemented at county level, at national level, that our young people are getting the 30% of government business.
How are you pushing to ensure that it is implemented actually? Because you sit in a house that is to oversight, is to ensure that these things are done. So how are you ensuring that the legislation, the acts of parliament are actually implemented to the tooth?
When I tasked the ministry and the National Treasury with these statistics, they give us the numbers, how are youth benefiting from this law. It was through a committee of the Senate that is tasked with dealing all matters financial and all this government business. And so they are the ones who are tasked in ensuring and following up to make sure that this is happening. Of course, I don't sit in that committee. I sit in a different committee, but I'm very sure that they're doing the job.
What is possible for people to hold on to in terms of hope? Because we straddle a position that is political and it's also government here, where we talk about this environment that must be created, because we can talk about it for days. I am sure that today, if you deal with a situation whereby a young person finishing at whatever level, whether we're saying the TVET level, finishing at the university level, is granted an opportunity because of this environment to start a business or to get into a job, and that at least the opportunity is guaranteed. What they do with it thereafter is entirely up to them. But if the opportunity then has been granted to them, I am sure that that person would offer you their allegiance for as long as they were alive. But if we don't see that kind of situation happening, guess what? That fuels the situation whereby you mentioned some of the things where you talk about the criticism. Where do you think it comes from? The constant barrage that we see, it's coming from a place where Kenya's population is upset because these things that should be done as per responsibility are not happening. And then on top of that, the political sways that we see are pushing people in a certain direction. That's where it's coming from. It's not because people are bored and they don't have anything to do in their house with the computer. It's because people are frustrated over things that they said were told that could happen or would happen, and then they're not happening.
What's happening in Kenya is not unique. You know, Kenya happens to be experiencing a youth bulge. And that happens when a certain demographic, which in our case is the youth, is in the majority. Is in the majority by far. And like I mentioned before, it's a resource. It depends on how a country makes use of it. And the president has said time and time again that he's going to stop at nothing to ensure that the youth are equipped with skills, which is a starting point. You cannot create employment however number of employment you want to create, and the youth do not match the skills demand. For example, our TVETs. The government is very keen to fund and to expand the TVETs in our country because, and I keep on referring to the export of labor, where even Dr. Alfred Mutua has committed to creating 1 million jobs annually. We know 300 have left for Qatar. 300 have left for Qatar. Others are supposed to go to Germany. The German market, the labor market and for Kenya is insatiable. But we have a gap because our Kenyan youth, our Kenyan nurses, our Kenyan ECD teachers do not have proficiency in the language, which is a requirement before you can step foot in Germany. So we have this huge demand in Germany and the European countries, where they really want our labor, but we have a skills gap where we do not have the language proficiency, and that's why language is being introduced in the TVET as we speak. They're teaching German language, French language, and other language, Arabic, to prepare our youth for what is being in demand out there.
Is there possibility of the government to come up with, to rather implement its goal on manufacturing in the country, so that the skills that we are exporting can work for Kenyan factories back home?
I think the recent visit or tour by the president in China had several big wins, because some of the agreements he signed are creating direct employment. We have the textile and apparel, like I mentioned. I think employing, was it 7,000? There is the blue economy in Mombasa, the deal that he signed towards that, promises of 30,000 jobs. And so I think we are taking steps in the right direction, but our economy is growing kind of slow. We need to, because it's the economic growth is commensurate with jobs. We already know that. So, baby steps.
You had actually mentioned something to do with our funding model and places that it has been copied from, rather, where we've picked it from. And some of the countries just mentioned that have used that funding model. We talk about South Africa, we talk about Germany, we talk about Australia. And if you look at their education and how it has been structured, how it is working, and the successes there be, it is working. Back home, we've picked that, copy-pasted, but the problem is in the implementation of this funding model, right? And it's a funding model that is affecting millions of Kenyans who are accessing education. As a senator, a young senator, always championing for the youth, what are some of the initiatives you as a leader are doing together with the government that you serve in to ensure that the teething problems you talk about are sorted out so that young people are able to access the quality education they have. They're able to get into entrepreneurship through assist by the government, so that the government itself comes full circle and ensure that there are opportunities, whether outside or inside, and that it is cutthroat being done and implemented well.
I think we must not lose focus. Why in the first place we came up with such a model. This model is founded on the bottom-up economy, the better that this government got elected on that platform. And it goes to ensure that poor families are not missing out on an education. At the same time, that the government is not burdened to pay for rich students, so to speak. If I can afford, why should I strain the government to pay for my child while a poor parent who has to meet the gap that comes about by government funding everyone equally, while they can be funded up to almost 100% and I pay almost nothing? We must not lose focus to that. And to me, that is a game changer, and we have to appreciate that, first of all, before we even start to criticize, because all these teething problems, as I keep calling them, they are neither here nor there. And as they get identified, they get fixed.
How do you think that Kenyans ought to register their frustration or their displeasure with things going left or south?
I think the law is very clear. We have picketing, even maandamano, as you call it here in Kenya, is legally provided for.
Really?
But
please, go
yes,
ahead.
in the Constitution. And there are ways to do it. The law governs how this activity should be undertaken.
So you agree with protests?
Definitely, it's a legal way of expressing yourself.
Yes.
Yes, I do.
So the protest that took place last year against some of these things that we've mentioned this morning, that saw quite a number of young people killed, and that refusal to even allow them in the streets, you believe that that was an all right way to then be able to register the displeasure with some of the, many would call them even draconian laws in the finance bill, or draconian authoritative or authoritarian laws that were being brought about, or behavior of government. Do you think that it was an acceptable manner of registering that displeasure?
What happened last year it was complex. There was a genuine young people who mobilized themselves on social media, and they were actually aggrieved. And at the same time, there was political underplays in the background that some innocent youth were oblivious about. They did not know that there are people who are paying influencers in this country to to mobilize people on political lines. You know, I don't want to name them, but we knew the people who are being used politically to mobilize the youth. So the youth came out very authentic, very spontaneous, against some of the things that were non-existent in the finance bill. Things they came up with, that we're going to tax bread. There's all this manner of things that they were claiming that was not actually in the finance bill. So politicians took advantage of the anger wave, and that's why you saw this mixed police handling youth differently. There was a criminal aspect, and you had to protect the right of the people who are genuinely protesting. At the same time, you had to rein in on the criminals. And it is unfortunate that we lost young people. Those are incidences that will always form a reference point in this country that we should never go back to. But in these things, it's a really difficult balance, and I don't want to be in the shoes of police during such
as we talk about the protests that happened and the killings that we saw outside Parliament, it has taken more than a year for any answers with regard to what happened outside Parliament. And we would tie that with what we actually saw recently, where the late MP was shot dead, and we've seen the pace with which investigations have taken place. Kenyans are saying there seems to be Kenyans who are more important in the society when it comes to the dispensation of justice. Where do you stand? What's your comment on that?
I maintain that it was quite unfortunate that we lost innocent youth. I do not think the ones who lost their lives were actually the people who the police intended to rein in on. Because, yes, there was a criminal aspect, but the people who... Because there's wrecks. I know some names. I know some individuals who got caught up in this. And those were just innocent young people who were voicing their dissent, protesting against what they thought was draconian law, and they ended up losing their lives. And I will maintain that was very, very unfortunate.
And the investigations are the same? Should it take that long?
I know that there's investigations that were done, and some police were released from the force, or they're facing charges.
Transferred, or some facing.
I know one in Nairobi in the CBD that actually got charged. The one who was caught on camera actually shooting a young man, although that young man did not die. So also there are laws protecting police when they are on the line of duty. And
there
that
are laws
complicates
protecting Kenyans as well.
True, and that complicates the situation. I am not an expert in that. I do not want to comment much, but it's not a good thing. I do not.
I mean, I can hear the difficulty with which you mentioned some of these things, because again, it's a difficult place to straddle. Then being in a position of leadership, but at the same time saying this is where we stand with the young people. It continues to be a difficult one, but I think that it is one that has to be handled with the greatest amount of prudence and integrity and transparency. We want to thank you for coming in this morning, Senator, for sharing your thoughts with us. The cry for Kenya is to have a transparent, accountable government at all times, regardless. And thank you so much for being here this morning and sharing your time with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Of course, we look forward to a Kenya where we have open governance, where the government is working side by side with its citizen. Every new policy introduced, first disseminated to its people, and we move together so that it's not always a reaction.
Indeed.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.